I know who sent him.
Keep your eyes down, Talia murmured, her grip on Baekhyuntae's silk tie intensifying. A sniper is positioned at 2 o'clock. Your driver just gave him a signal. Either kiss me or face death. His hand moved to the back of her neck, and the glass at the obsidian's entrance shattered precisely where his head had been just 3 seconds earlier. The night was thick with the scent of wet pavement and the expensive aroma of cedar wood and aged leather, the kind of smell that followed men who owned cities rather than lived in them. Talia stood by the heavy glass door in her white and red uniform, feeling the cold dampness of the city air. Baekhyuntae paused on the threshold, his profile sharp against the gold light of the interior, carrying an absolute stillness that made movement seem vulgar. At his age, he moved with the power of someone who had culled weakness early, his dark eyes reflecting light without absorbing it. Talia had spent her time at the Obsidian learning to read the micro-expressions of men like him, men who carried violence like a tailored suit and rarely noticed service staff. She knew the difference between inherited wealth and power maintained with fear. Through the glass, she watched the driver, Nam Ji-suk, check his watch with his right hand. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The movement was wrong, a specific, choreographed signal intended for a killer. Thought the glass didn't just break, it disintegrated, transforming into a lethal shower of safety diamonds that fell like frozen rain. The sound arrived a heartbeat late, a violent, percussive crack that confirmed the bullet had moved faster than the air itself. Talia felt the heat of the round as it pulverized the space where Baekhyuntae's skull had been positioned only seconds before. Move. Hyuntae's voice was no longer a whisper, it was a guttural command that brooked no argument. He didn't wait for her compliance. His hand, calloused and firm, slid from the back of her neck to her wrist, anchoring her to him with the solid weight of a man who viewed the world through the lens of tactical survival. He pivoted, his body a shield of bespoke wool and controlled fury as he dragged her away from the threshold of the Obsidian. Outside, the rainy Tuesday erupted into a symphony of terror. A woman inside the club began to shriek, her voice a jagged wall of noise that cut through the sudden roar of car alarms. Tires screamed against the wet asphalt as idling vehicles accelerated, their drivers making the split-second calculation to flee the carnage. Hyuntae's security detail swarmed the sidewalk, men in dark suits moving with a fluid, military precision that turned the sidewalk into a combat zone. Weapons appeared in their hands with the speed of long-practiced instinct as they established a defensive perimeter around their boss. The driver, Hyuntae rasped, his eyes turning to black ice as he scanned the chaos. Talia's gaze followed him. Nam Ji-suk was already on the pavement, his wrists secured by zip ties, pinned down by 2 enforcers who handled the betrayal with efficient brutality. The man she had known as a driver was weeping now, his face pressed against the damp pavement. Your men have him, Talia managed, her voice rough and trembling with the adrenaline singing through her veins. Hyuntae looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing not just a waitress, but the woman who had calculated the exact geometry required to keep him alive. One of his men, a broad-shouldered enforcer with scarred knuckles, appeared at his elbow, urgent and sharp. The sniper is still out there. We need to move now. She comes with us, Hyuntae replied, his thumb tracing a small, electric circle against Talia's skin as he pulled her toward a sleek, black Mercedes. Talia's mind raced with the instinct to run, to disappear back into the anonymity she had spent years cultivating. But Hyuntae's grip was an anchor, a tether to a world she had burned to escape. The door closed with the heavy, armored thunk of German engineering, sealing them inside a cabin that smelled of leather and the lingering scent of gunpowder. As the car lurched forward, Talia watched the Obsidian vanish into the rain, knowing she was no longer a ghost, but a target. The black Mercedes navigated the rain-slicked streets of Queens like a predator seeking cover, eventually pulling up to a brownstone that looked like architectural abandonment. Cracked concrete steps led to a door hanging crooked in its frame, and windows, dark as closed eyes, were layered with graffiti like scar tissue. Inside, the air tasted of dust and old secrets, smelling of places where bad things had happened and the evidence had been left to rot. Hyuntae moved through the minimal space with economical grace, his hand resting on the weapon outlined beneath his jacket. He went to a far wall, swinging aside a mass-produced painting of the Brooklyn Bridge to reveal a wall safe. After a few practiced clicks, he turned back with a manila envelope. $50,000, he said, placing it on a scarred wooden table. Take it. Disappear. Forget tonight happened. His tone suggested human memory was just another commodity he could purchase. Talia stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Instead, her mind raced back to the driver's choreographed signal and the red glint of the laser sight. Someone had access to Hyuntae's security protocols and his contingency plans. She reached past the cash, her fingers closing around the burner phone sitting beside his car keys. "What are you doing?" he asked, his hand hovering near his holster. Without answering, Talia dismantled the phone with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime around surveillance devices. She popped the back panel, extracted the battery, and set the SIM card aside in a neat, silent row. Then, she walked toward the heating vent near the baseboard. She knelt, painfully aware of his eyes tracking her every movement like a predator watching prey. Her fingers brushed the cold, rusted metal of the grate and found what she expected. When she straightened, she held a small magnetic tracker between her thumb and forefinger, its LED pulsing red like a mechanical heartbeat. "There are 2 more, she said calmly, her voice devoid of its previous professional deference. One in the couch lining, left side, about 8 inches deep. One behind the smoke detector." The silence that followed was heavy, narrowing the room until there was only the 2 of them and the implications of her discovery. Hyuntae's expression went arctic, his muscles locking as he recalculated everything he knew about the waitress from the Obsidian. "This isn't a safe house," Talia continued, setting the pulse of red light on the table beside the phone parts. "It's a kill box. Whoever sent that sniper has been watching your routines for months. They know exactly where you react under pressure." She watched the mask of the Mafia boss crack, replaced by a calculating intensity. He stopped seeing her as a liability and started seeing her as a weapon. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice soft and dangerous. Talia's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her chin up and her hands loose at her sides where Hyuntae could see them. She stayed open, resisting every instinct to assume a defensive posture as his gaze narrowed with arctic calculation. 3 years ago, I was a forensic accountant for the O'Malley crime family, she began, her voice steady and stripped of the emotion that still lived in the words like shrapnel. She explained how she had been hired to clean up irregularities in their offshore accounts, routing money through shells and corporations to mask the origins of their wealth. Hyuntae went preternaturally still, the kind of silence that precedes a revelation or a strike. "The irregularities weren't mistakes, they were theft," Talia continued, remembering the way certain accounts bled small, systematic amounts to avoid triggering alerts. The underboss and his mistress had siphoned off $7.3 million over 4 years. They had created an entire parallel financial structure within the family's legitimate operations. She watched him process the implications, his jaw working beneath the skin. "I didn't report it to the O'Malleys," she said quietly. "I went directly to the FBI and handed them a complete roadmap, routing numbers, account passwords, and documented proof of RICO violations going back a decade. I gave them everything they needed to dismantle the empire." The O'Malleys had collapsed in 6 weeks, their properties seized and assets frozen as indictments rolled out like dominoes. An empire built over 3 generations had burned to ash because she remembered numbers and knew how to make them stick. "The FBI gave me immunity for my testimony, but the cartel put $3 million on my head anyway," she said, her eyes meeting his with fierce clarity. "I proved that accountants could be more dangerous than assassins." To survive, she had disappeared into the best hiding place in the world, service work. No one remembers the woman who brings the drinks or adjusts the ties. In the world of the powerful, Waitresses are merely furniture or wallpaper. But I remember everything, Talia whispered, her voice dropping into a register of warning. I see patterns. I notice when things don't fit. And your driver's signal? That was a dead man's confirmation. Hyuntae moved toward her, closing the distance until she could smell the gunpowder in his clothes and the rain drying in his hair. The auditor, he said slowly, tasting the legend on his tongue like wine. The woman who destroyed the Omalis from the inside. You're the ghost story criminal accountants tell to scare each other. I'm trying very hard to be no one now, Talia corrected, even as her heart tried to escape her ribs. Too late for that, he replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous intimacy. The industrial basement smelled of rust and old blood, a weight of terror so substantial it felt breathable. Talia stood in the shadows where the flickering overhead light failed against the dark, her arms wrapped tight against a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Nam Ji-isuk was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the concrete floor, his face a canvas of bruises and crusted blood. His eyes held a raw, animal terror, but beneath it lay a drowning love that made Talia's chest ache with recognition. Hyuntae stood before him, a figure of controlled fury with his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. You signaled him, Hyuntae's voice was terrifyingly gentle. You've been with me for 5 years. You were at my father's funeral. You saved my life twice. I didn't want to, Ji-isuk whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. They have Jian. They took my sister. They knew she's insulin dependent. They said they'd let the timer run out if I didn't signal. Talia felt her stomach turn to ice. This was how loyalty was weaponized, by taking hostage the only thing that mattered more than honor. But it's so much worse, Hyung-nim, Ji-isuk's voice broke. They knew you'd capture me. They wanted this. He began ripping at the buttons of his shirt with his teeth in a violent, desperate need to confess. As the fabric gave way, the air left Talia's lungs. Strapped across his chest with industrial tape was a vest of C4 wired to a professional circuit board. In the center, a malevolent red LED display counted down, 043, 042, 041. This was always a suicide mission, Ji-isuk said with a sudden, haunting calm. I was dead the moment they chose me. Go now. You have to go. The timer jumped, 015, 014, 013. Chaos erupted as Hyuntae's men tried to drag him toward the exit, but Hyuntae fought them, desperately trying to reach the man he loved like a brother. Go. Ji-isuk screamed one last time. He threw his entire body, chair and all, bound hands and explosive vest, toward a small ground-level window to channel the blast away. He hit the glass at the exact moment the timer hit 0. The world turned white and hot. Talia felt Hyuntae's weight slam her into the concrete floor as a physical wall of pressure rewrote reality. Glass rained down like diamonds, followed by a suffocating silence that tasted of copper and burnt plastic, the smell of a sacrifice reduced to its base components. The mobile command center smelled like electronics and the cold, sharp tension that precedes a revelation. Talia sat at the computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years making numbers confess their secrets. Lines of code and financial records scrolled past as she deconstructed the digital architecture of the betrayal. Hyuntae stood behind her, his presence like heat against her back, his breath stirring her hair as he leaned in to read the screen. The money trail leads back to a shell corporation in Delaware, Talia said, her blood turning to slush as the final layer of encryption peeled away. But the authorization signatures are coming from inside your organization. Someone with biometric clearance. Someone you trust. The name that appeared on the screen made Hyuntae's entire body go rigid. Kangdae. His younger brother, the one who had supposedly been in Italy studying architecture, far removed from the family's violent business. Talia pulled up travel records showing a private return to New York 3 weeks ago, no customs, no official record. He's working with a government task force, Talia noted, highlighting a series of off-book wire transfers. This isn't an investigation. It's a sanctioned elimination. The CIA has wanted to dismantle you for years, and your brother is handing them the keys. They won't just arrest me, Hyuntae finished, his voice hollow as he realized the depth of the treachery. They'll erase me and claim they were cleaning up a gang war. His hand moved toward the weapons locker, his fingers curling around a handgun with lethal intent. I'm going to kill everyone in that building. Talia stood, positioning herself between him and the guns. You go in there now, you die. They want you to be emotional. They want you to be reckless. They killed Ji-Isuk to break you, to make you stop thinking and start feeling. Get out of my way, he growled, his eyes like black ice. I memorized your routing numbers, Talia said, her voice a steady anchor in his storm. Every account, every shell corporation, every sequence to your fortune is in here. You walk out that door on a suicide mission, and I freeze it all. I will transfer your money to charity. I will burn your empire to the ground before you can throw your life away. The silence stretched like razor wire. Hyuntae slammed his hands into the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. Why do you care if I live or die? Because you protected me in that explosion, Talia whispered, looking into his rage and seeing her own grief reflected back. Because I saw myself in your rage. You handle the blood. I'll handle the money. But we do it together. The fluorescent lights of the subway station flickered, casting long, rhythmic shadows against the grime-streaked tiles as the 4 trains screeched into the platform. Talia didn't wait for the doors to fully open. She slipped through the gap, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs that matched the pulse of the city above. Behind her, the heavy tread of tactical boots echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The syndicate's cleaners were closing in, and they weren't here to negotiate. She lunged into the moving car just as the chimes sounded. The train lurched forward, throwing her against the cold steel pole. Through the closing glass, she locked eyes with the lead operative, a man with a jagged scar across his jaw. He didn't look frustrated, he looked patient. The chase transitioned into a blurred landscape of steel and darkness. Talia moved through the cars, stumbling over the feet of weary commuters who didn't dare look up from their phones. She could see them in the reflection of the windows, 3 men, moving with lethal efficiency 2 cars back. As the train plummeted into the deep tunnel between Manhattan and Brooklyn, Talia reached into her jacket and pulled out the pressurized canister she'd prepped for this exact moment. She needed a ghost, and the only way to become one was to die. The train roared, the sound of metal grinding on metal reaching a deafening crescendo. Talia stepped into the vestibule between the cars, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. She saw the flash of a suppressed muzzle from the car behind her. A bullet sparked off the door frame. Now, she whispered. She jammed a metal rod into the manual door release and triggered the canister. A blinding flash of magnesium light and a controlled concussive blast ripped through the coupling. To the operatives watching through the glass, it looked like a desperate misfire or a lucky shot hitting a gas line. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid, filling the narrow space. Talia didn't jump into the path of the wheels. Instead, she swung outward, her fingers catching the narrow ledge of the tunnel's maintenance alcove with bone-jarring force. She tucked her body into the shadows of the wet brickwork as the train roared past, a screaming ghost of light and steel. In the wake of the train's passing, silence rushed back into the tunnel, heavy and smelling of ozone. On the tracks lay her scorched jacket and a discarded, blood-smeared burner phone, fragments of a life she no longer owned. She stayed pressed against the cold stone, unmoving, until the vibrations of the rails faded to nothing. Talia was gone. Now, only the shadow remained. The penthouse overlooking Central Park smelled of money, expensive flowers, aged whiskey, and the subtle musk of leather furniture. Talia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection sharp against the night skyline. Her dress was crimson silk that moved like blood, and though her shoulder had healed, it ached with phantom pain from the subway tracks. "You look stunning," Kangde said, approaching with 2 flutes of champagne. He was younger than Hyente, his features softer and his smile easier, wearing civility like camouflage where his brother wore violence like a tailored suit. As his hand settled possessively on the small of her back, Talia fought the urge to flinch. His touch assumed consent, lacking the quiet request for permission she had always felt from Hyente. "I still can't believe my brother's famous auditor walked into my office," he murmured. "When I heard you were dead, killed in that subway ambush, I was disappointed. Such a waste of talent." "I'm very good at not dying," Talia replied lightly, though her hand tightened around her glass. The past 14 days had been a calculated performance. After faking her death with a body from the city morgue, she had appeared at Condé's door with a story of survival and a pragmatic willingness to switch to the winning team. Arrogant with his anticipated victory, Condé had believed her. "I assume you know he's been on a rather destructive rampage since your death," Condé continued, his eyes sharp. "He's going scorched earth. Honestly, it's almost romantic. The dragon destroying everything in grief over his little accountant." He swirled his champagne, his voice dripping with 30 years of resentment at being the insurance policy brother. "When he's gone, I won't be second best. I'll be the man who sold the dragon to the butchers and walked away with the crown." Talia met his eyes, letting him see exactly what he wanted, ambition and the cold survival instinct of a hunted woman. "The signing is tomorrow night," he told her. "Chrysler Building. CIA agents, wire transfers, the whole theater. And you are going to help me make sure the financial transfers go smoothly." "That's exactly what I do," she said. As she spoke, she adjusted the platinum ring on her finger, set with a single black diamond. Condé didn't notice the way she leaned into him, the jewelry brushing against his sleeve. He didn't know the ring was a sophisticated biometric scanner, already cloning his data, his fingerprints, and his life. In 24 hours, she would return the silk tie she held in trust and watch his world burn. The 77th floor of the Chrysler Building felt like the inside of a silver bird, all polished chrome and sharp, Art Deco angles. Outside, the city was a tapestry of amber lights, but inside the executive suite, the air was sterile and thin. Talia sat at the heavy mahogany desk belonging to the man she had spent 3 weeks tracking. Her hands, steady despite the adrenaline humming in her veins, flew across the keyboard of an encrypted laptop. She wasn't the girl from the subway anymore. Her hair was cropped short, dyed a severe obsidian, and her eyes held the cold clarity of someone who had already seen the end of the world. On the monitor, a progress bar crawled forward, 84% complete. She was deep inside the Caymans-based shell accounts that fueled the syndicate's local operations. "Almost there," she murmured, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her pupils. With a final, decisive keystroke, the total balance field flickered and began to plummet toward zero. Millions of dollars, blood money laundered through a dozen fronts, cascaded into a series of untraceable dead-drop accounts she had established across the globe. She wasn't just stealing their capital, she was cauterizing their nervous system. The office door hissed open. 2 men in tailored charcoal suits stepped in, their expressions shifting from corporate boredom to lethal intent the moment they saw her. Before they could reach for their holsters, Talia tapped the spacebar. A dozen monitors mounted on the far wall flared to life. They didn't show stock tickers or news feeds. Instead, they displayed private photographs, leaked transcripts of encrypted messages, and detailed ledgers of off-book assassinations. Each screen featured the faces of the men in the room and their superiors. "Don't," Talia said, her voice a calm, low rasp that stopped them in their tracks. "The moment my heart rate spikes or this connection is severed, every file you see is uploaded to the DOJ, the Interpol Internal Affairs server, and 3 rival syndicates who would love to know exactly how much you've been skimming from the top." The man on the left, a veteran enforcer named Elias, let his hand hover over his weapon. "You're dead anyway, girl. you think you can walk out of here? I think you're mistaken about who's in control, Talia replied, standing slowly. She slid a small, silver drive into her pocket. The money is gone. Your leverage is gone. The only thing keeping you from a life sentence, or a shallow grave dug by your own employers, is me. I own your silence, and in exchange, you're going to give me the location of the director. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the server cooling fans. Talia walked toward them, her gaze never wavering, moving with the predatory grace of someone who had nothing left to lose. The morning light in Seoul was different from the harsh, flickering neon of New York. It filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the apartment in soft, milky ribbons, warming the pale wood floors and the scent of fresh tea. There was no sound of sirens or the heavy tread of tactical boots, only the rhythmic, distant hum of the city waking up and the quiet breathing of a child. Talia sat on the balcony, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug. The jagged scars on her knuckles had faded to thin, silvery lines, maps of a past life that felt more like a half-remembered fever dream. She watched the mist cling to the peaks of Bukhansan in the distance, a sight that promised nothing but the steady passage of time. "You're up early," a voice murmured behind her. Baek Hyuntae stepped onto the balcony, his shoulders relaxed in a way they never could have been 3 years ago. He leaned against the railing, his presence a grounding force that had anchored her through the long, silent months of looking over her shoulder. He didn't ask if she was okay, he knew the quiet was no longer a threat to her. He simply placed a hand over hers, his thumb tracing the ridge of her wrist. "The air is clear today," Talia said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I wanted to see the horizon." From the bedroom, a small, sleepy voice drifted toward them. Gianni appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes with one hand while clutching a worn stuffed rabbit in the other. She had Hyuntae's observant eyes and Talia's stubborn set of the jaw. At 4 years old, her world was defined by the taste of honey snacks and the safety of her parents' shadows. "Yama," the girl chirped, reaching up. Talia scooped her daughter into her arms, pressing her face into the child's hair. The scent of lavender soap and sleep replaced the metallic tang of magnesium and ozone that had once haunted her senses. For years, Talia had been a ghost, a weapon, and a shadow. She had burned down empires to buy this silence, and as Gianni laughed, pointing at a bird soaring past the balcony, Talia finally felt the weight in her chest dissolve. The syndicate was a memory buried under layers of encrypted ghosts and empty accounts. The director was a footnote in a history she had rewritten with fire. Here, in the heart of a city that moved with a different kind of life, she wasn't a target. She was a mother. She was a partner. She was home. She looked at Hyuntae and saw the same peace reflected in his gaze. They had survived the storm, and for the first time, the horizon wasn't a place to run to, it was simply a view to enjoy.